morning and welcome to Cowboy Politics with Tommy Welchman. And we have a fantastic show for you guys today. Yesterday we did spend some time discussing the conservative win we had in the courts, where Judge Doughty rightly granted an injunction against the Biden administration to stop censoring conservatives and conservative posts in social media. But of course, our communist president and his communist attorneys actually want a communist result, so they immediately filed an appeal to be able to collude with big tech and censor any dissension from their ideology. We're also going to talk a little bit more about the insanity behind the trans movement and how the CDC, right, the Center for Disease Control, gives guidance for trans people to, get this, ready? Chest feeding. And by trans people, I mean men. Chest feeding and the CDC's failure to consider the possible health risks of doping up men with all kinds of drugs to make their breasts lactate like a woman's, but not really considering the risk of those drugs entering the milk and therefore entering the child. Nor did they consider the health of the man milk. Guys, sounds gross when I say it, right? Man milk, which is simply disgusting, especially since they weren't created to be able to do such a thing. So let's just face facts and stick with science, huh? And finally, we're going to get into a little bit about where our military stands right now and why nearly 80% of all new military recruits are related to those who already served their country. And in addition to that, 77% of America's youth are not even eligible to serve, according to the Pentagon. We're going to dig into that and far more. So sit back, relax, and put your seatbelt on. Welcome to Cowboy Politics with Tommy Welchman, and let's get this show started. As you know, folks, yesterday we discussed at length that Biden ruling, which I just talked about, right? Where the Biden administration was sued by two states, Louisiana and Missouri, who, according to an Epoch Times article, accused them of pushing social media companies to censor posts and take down accounts at what their complaint alleged was that it was one of the greatest assaults on the freedom of speech by federal officials in America's history. And simply to refresh our memories, what this preliminary injunction did was simply rule that various government agencies, including Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Justice, are prohibited from taking a range of actions regarding social media companies, including communicating with them about censoring content. Now, also, as we discussed yesterday, there were individuals in Biden's cabinet that were also mentioned who are not allowed to contact the tech giants and social media companies, including Karine Jean-Pierre, or KJP, a.k.a. Karen Jean-Pierre. Now, we all know that they were going to appeal the decision that came out that would limit the reach of our communist president, who presides over a communist cabinet and who's installed communist directors in all of our communist 3 4-letter government agencies, well, 3 and 4-letter government agencies, who want nothing but to bring about a communist result, communist laws, and a communist economy within the borders of the United States of America. So really, guys, it's no surprise that Biden's attorneys are filing an appeal in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in Louisiana and seeking, of course, to overturn that landmark ruling, preventing them from this censorship by proxy. You know, I obviously used some inflammatory words there, like repeating the word communist multiple times in a row. I understand that. And I know some of you might find that offensive. And for that, I can truly say I am definitely not sorry. Not even one little bit. Not at all. So here's a question, right? What does this tell us? What does this whole appeal process tell us about the government as it stands right now today? Why would they appeal a ruling in which they cannot collude with big tech and with social media to limit the posts and the reach of anyone who dissents from their particular brand of ideology? Why would they want to silence Americans from commenting or questioning the government? Why would they want to prevent communication between the people? And those questions seem somewhat redundant in nature because all we do know is the answer, right? We do know what the answer is. They do not want any dissent in the ranks. They don't want any other opinion, any other than their own. They don't want any other type of government other than the one that they've instituted, their own. And the type of government they've chosen is the antithesis to the type of government America was founded upon. It's much more socialist and communist than we would even like to discuss, but we must get out of our comfort zone and call it what it really is. Not in hyperbole, not because we're all worked up emotionally at the nonsense the Biden administration is doing, but because that is actually what we see. And in truth, I think it's a little worse than the redundant questions I asked. I think the more important question here is, why is the federal government trying to do away with, work around, or otherwise completely ignore the First Amendment of the United States Constitution? All right, so let's just answer that question as best we can with the information that we have. And of course, basing our responses on the last 2.5 years of the Biden administration and their behavior and policymaking during that same period of time, we are able to rightly conclude that the Democrats, especially the liberal Democrats and the left, especially the left-wing lunatics, hate America and all that it stands for. Democrats hate America, right? They have been brainwashed to think that America is a systematically racist, horrible nation that has done nothing but commit atrocities since even before its founding. They've assumed the ridiculous position of trying to hold people accountable today for what was done long before their birth, and yet not holding themselves accountable for the very things that they're actually doing right now. And more importantly, not letting anyone else hold them accountable, since we know it's impossible to hold a Democrat accountable of themselves. You know, we have to do that job. We're supposed to do that job. That's what they're trying to prevent us from doing. So as a moment in review, let's take a look at some of what they're trying to push through and what the catalysts were for each of these things. You know, of course, back in 2020, we had the George Floyd event, which spurred the whole Black Lives Matter movement, which, of course, is in and of itself a fascist movement in America. This is the militaristic wing of the left-wing lunatics in our government. And they use it, or at least they had, to bring about both social justice, if you remember that term, and cure all the ails of racial inequity, if you remember that little ditty. And likewise, we can't forget the neo-Marxist movement. This whole thing is about ushering in an entirely new government in place of the republic we're supposed to have here in America. And folks, this is very difficult to do with Americans recognizing it, talking about it, posting information about it on every social media website that there is, and discussing it and bringing attention to the radicalism the liberal Democrats are using to try to destroy America. More evidence of this is the fact that the liberal left is trying to divide Americans into classes. Whites, blacks, Asians, Muslims, Christians, brown people, the oppressed, the white supremacists. The list continues to go on and on and on. Once again, it's much easier to conquer a people if you divide them into classes. Because if you look at them simply as Americans, you'll never be able to achieve that goal. You have to pit these people against each other. You have to cause strife between the groups. They have to be angry at one another. They have to be longing for change, or at least something different. And once again, you can't do that if they're united under one flag with 13 stripes and 50 stars. You can't divide them if they all consider themselves freedom-loving Americans. You can't get them to hate each other if they love their country and by extension, love and respect one another. Of course, we've seen a decline in political correctness, and of course, the cancel culture to a degree has lost some of its momentum. Even though we still see some of these sport and athletic losers and music industry moguls who make the slightest itty-bitty comment on their own social media, right? And they're forced to debase themselves and apologize and beg forgiveness from the mob. Now, granted, just a few short years ago, it was really bad, kind of like the U2 movement, right? Or the Me Too movement. It was really bad. But now we still even hear this, you know, an athlete or a movie star will go on and they'll put something out there that the left considers insulting or worse yet, the transgender movement. And they have to debase themselves, beg forgiveness, and they get slaughtered anyway. They're cannibalized anyway by the left. The resulting punishment against some of our more famous people, such as these sports icons and music moguls, actors and actresses, and other people in prominent, influential positions throughout the United States, can instill, and it does, a certain amount of fear in the average, everyday, hardworking, blue-collar American who doesn't want to post anything on social media, nor communicate publicly with his neighbors or like-minded people. They run the risk of being singled out, being castigated and shamed, being made an example of. The left-wing liberal lunatic activists, they'll call their workplace. They will dox them. They'll shut them down any way that they can. So aside from simply colluding with big tech and the social media companies, the left is doing everything it can to simply make you afraid to comment, afraid for your job, your family, your financial security, and in some cases, afraid for your life. This is another way that the Biden administration is doing this workaround of the First Amendment. Since they can't create another amendment to undo the First Amendment, they got to find this workaround and instill fear in anyone willing to submit to it. And in truth, it's been quite effective at keeping the resistance in America from going and really getting in their faces. They're the America that is going against them, that's standing up to the fascist, socialist, communists, and all this change we see in our government, it's keeping it really to a low roar because people are somewhat afraid and intimidated. Now, on the government side, of course, in our history, remember this is a nice walk down history lane here, we remember the Russia hoax in which allegedly President Trump colluded with Russia, right? Resulting in that corrupt Mueller investigation. And yes, of course, Mueller and the Russia hoax were eventually debunked. However, there was still damage done. And many people who would otherwise have served our government in one capacity or another will no longer do so simply because of the fear of this kind of an attack. Of course, we also have the Trump impeachment, both of them, the insane statements having come out of cities like Chicago, Baltimore, Los Angeles, San Francisco concerning the police and the law and how those cities are riddled with crime, including armed robbery, rape, and murder, numbering in the hundreds, in some cities the thousands per year. We saw lunatics like in the past Beto O'Rourke yelling how he's going to take your AR-15s away, and multiple movements to try to do away with the Second Amendment and disarm the American public. Here again, we see these workarounds from the federal government, as well as some state governors doing everything they can to intimidate the people, to silence them, to cause anarchy where anarchy should never exist, and to elevate the rights of criminals over of law-abiding citizens, right? Talk about installing confusion, concern, fear. All of this is an effort to institute a new form of government in the United States and to intimidate people like you and me from speaking out and holding our elected officials, and in some instances, their bureaucratic appointed taskmasters, accountable for their actions. So in other words, folks, if you simply can't get it done legislatively, you got to find a workaround. How to flip America on its ear and get it to want something different so badly that the American public will plug its ears, cover its eyes, and just hope the sun comes up tomorrow. And of course, I can go on and on, not just for hours, but days on all of the things this corrupt Biden administration, and let's not leave out here the catalyst, the starter of all of this, the Obama administration, and all the illegal things they have done in an effort to either silence Americans completely, regardless of the First Amendment, or simply make them too afraid to comment if they can't get rid of or legislatively eliminate the First Amendment. So really, folks, is it any surprise that the Biden administration attorneys are filing this appeal to undo the injunction that simply states they cannot collude with big tech and social media to have opposing views, conservative views banned, removed, or throttled so no one can see them? This should not surprise any of us. Now, of course, it would have been wise for the left, right? When I say them, I mean the left, to walk away from this and focus on something different, making a public statement that, of course, this ruling wasn't even necessary. This injunction wasn't necessary. Of course, we honor the First Amendment. It's one of our most basic rights. Right? That would have been the smart thing to do. And yet here's another point of order, right? They are so emboldened at this time that they're not even afraid of the backlash they're going to get to appeal the injunction stating that they cannot collude with big tech and social media, do precisely that. What they want to do is shut you up. That's what they want to do. And like I said, they're so emboldened, they're not even afraid that we're going to say, what are you talking about? You're going to file an appeal that states you, the federal government, have to honor the First Amendment? Nope. No fear. That's a problem, folks. Not afraid in the least. They are not afraid in the least of what's going to come from this, which unfortunately means some of their efforts in the past have borne fruit. That's what's really happened. They're simply unafraid. They'll publicly challenge the rights of Americans under the Constitution in court any day of the week. And this, my friend, is another tremendous reason why we need to band together as one voice, never stop being heard, never ease up on our posts, never stop questioning authority, never stop pointing out the illegal activities of the Biden administration, and never stop working towards the ultimate goal of throwing their asses out on Election Day, and thereby installing a government in love with our republic who will never, ever try to take away the rights of Americans as granted to us, not only by God, but by the Constitution and its amendments for this great land of ours. So, friends, I encourage you, be of good cheer, continue to question everything, demand accountability, demand it from our government, and do not be intimidated. There are millions, I would go so far as to say, not even tens of millions, but there's hundreds of millions of Americans counting on the bold, right? People like you and me on the bold to make a stand. And make a stand we shall. We're not going to shut up. And we're not going to go quietly into that good night, are we? Wow, folks. It's really an interesting time we're living in. It's an interesting time. And we can't be afraid to face it down. All right, so let's talk a little bit about this insanity coming out of the CDC. All right, folks, look at this headline behind me here, and I'm going to quote it. All right, here we go. Quote, CDC gives guidance for trans people chest feeding kids accused of failing to consider possible health risks. End quote. What? Now, obviously, we all have to learn to speak trans one way or another. So when we see the word chest feeding, we immediately know that applies to the liberal lunatic left saying that men can breastfeed babies. Now, my friends, don't be overly shocked by this. Remember, this is the same political party telling us that men can get pregnant and that men can give birth. So the idea that men can breastfeed, or as they like to say, chest feed, how androgynous, is only half as insane as men can get pregnant and have babies. You know, it's funny because, on the one hand, they play it off like when they say men, they mean women who transition to men that are actually still women. but pretending to be men, and then they have babies, and then they say a man can have a baby, and then they actually mean it. Oh, that men can get pregnant. It's flat out insanity. Look, before we even get into this, I have to say this. Yeah, this is just one more news report that proves why we can no longer trust our government health departments in any way, in any area whatsoever. We can't trust them. When they tell us what's healthy for us or what's not healthy for us, we can't trust them. When they say this vaccine is good or that vaccine is bad, we can't trust them. We can't trust our doctors anymore because medical schools now teach medical students that men can get pregnant too. And every one of us listening to this podcast today know that that is a complete lie. It is a fabrication, not even to be considered by people who are still in possession by their sanity and even the most basic levels of intellect. Even the most basic. We know a man can't get pregnant. Under no circumstances can a human man get pregnant. It's not possible. And yet, we Americans have to tolerate government medical agencies who have abandoned science wholeheartedly and gone into full ideology in support of the left. Isn't it a shame that we live in a time where we can't even trust our doctors anymore? And we certainly can't trust Big Pharma to give us good information about drugs that are available to help cure this issue or that issue anymore. We can't. And we can't trust the NIH. For God's sake, they have responsibility in the whole release of COVID-19. And they put out ridiculous statements in favor of the LGBTQ plus community and men getting pregnant and having babies. And here we go with some more nonsense from the CDC. Now that I have that out of the way, let's talk about what these idiots, and I don't say that loosely, I specifically mean idiots, have to say. All right. So I know what I said above might sound a little harsh to you, and you may think I'm installing a little bit of hyperbole there, but I'm not. I'm going to put up behind us right now a statement that just came out from the CDC. Ready? Here goes. I'm going to quote this. For those of you not watching Rumble or YouTube, I'm going to read it to you. Quote, in the CDC's website section on health equity considerations, found under its infant and young child feeding toolkit, the center declared that transgender and non-binary gendered individuals may give birth and breastfeed or feed at the chest. Close quote. Well, for those of you going, huh? I'm right there with you. And it goes on to say this. And again, I'm going to quote. Put it up behind me, gents. Open quote. The gender identity or expression of transgendered individuals is different from their sex at birth. The gender identity of non-binary gendered individuals does not fit neatly into either man nor woman. Close quote. So here we go again, folks. More statements of complete insanity coming from our very own Center for Disease Control. They actually subscribe to the idea that there are no more genders than just male and female. Science be damned. How can we trust anything that they have to say? Now, the whole point of this article they put out is a discussion on whether or not the poisonous, noxious, horrible drug therapy and the drugs that they give to men to get them to lactate like women may or will be transmitted in the breast milk to the child. And of course, what risks that drinking that poisonous drug they're giving a man to lactate like a woman could pose to the child. Think about this, folks. As far as the transgendered movement goes, physicians are using all kinds of hormone therapy off-label. In other words, not approved for this kind of use to try to get men, that is, human beings born male, with a penis, to lactate the same way a human female, the one with breasts, would lactate to give proper nutrition to a child. Now, just as an aside, just contrast that with what with COVID-19 and the off-label use of some very effective drugs that have since proven to be a real defense against COVID-19. These doctors, in a matter of weeks, had their medical license suspended, and the federal government threatened those physicians with losing their licenses to practice, saying that they would revoke them completely, no medical practice, if they continued to prescribe off-label to either, whatever your interpretation might be or whatever might be okay to say, to either cure or maybe ease the symptoms of COVID-19. Those physicians weren't allowed to do anything of the like. However, with the transgender movement, anything goes. Anything. Any medication you want that'll bring any kind of drug-induced changes, regardless of the risks, that will in any way help a male to perform like a female or a female to perform like a male with regard to sex and reproduction, hey, that's perfectly okay. A little bit of hypocrisy, maybe. I guess you'll have to be the judge on that. But how, in the name of all that's good and green and holy, could we trust these people with anything to do with medicine? They subscribe to an ideology. Now, of course, continuing through the article, it's full of all kinds of platitudes and emotional pleas and mental support, peer support, and all that other stuff that, a man trying to be a woman would need in order to feed their child, right? Oh, you need support groups here and support groups there, and, you might need some counseling, blah, blah, blah. All of this can be eliminated, right? If the child would just, do things the way God instructed them to be done and nurse off the breast of a woman, right? Anyway, I don't want to get lost in the facts and stick with science here. So let's get back to the article. So aside from all these platitudes, it appears that there's an issue, right? So according to this Fox News article, the FDA has warned that one of the drugs given to men to get them to lactate like women is called domperidone. Well, apparently domperidone can pass into breast milk. Yes, it's in small amounts, and sometimes it can give babies an irregular heartbeat as a result. Now, once again, that doesn't sound like much. But again, we have no idea what the long-term effects are. We don't know what this drug will do to that child 5, 10, 20, 50 years down the road. We have no clue. And it's being used off-label. But it's for the transgender movement. So it's okay. Is it a surprise to anyone that giving men hormone therapy and drugs to get their bodies to mimic a woman's could somehow pose a threat to an infant when exchanging a bodily fluid such as breast milk with that infant? I'm not surprised at all, and you shouldn't be either. Now, apparently there's some doctors out there who have criticized the CDC for not mentioning the health risks posed to infants chest feeding. I'm going to translate this one into everyday English, my friends. Basically what they're saying here is that the CDC is ideological. It's not scientific. They bought in so deeply with the transgendered movement that they're happy to authorize and stand behind the introduction of drugs into men to get their bodies to act like women and not even put out a warning, because if they do the right thing here and they actually put out a warning, possibly some of these mentally ill transgendered people may not want that drug. Or what should happen more frequently is that these sicko doctors, who, by the way, should be prosecuted for mutilation of the human body, may not or would not prescribe these drugs. But in a government led by ideology, and in the absence of any adherence to science or scientific principles, the CDC has simply abandoned all things right and good and true in favor of leftist ideology. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why you should never trust the CDC, the FDA, the NIH, or any other government agency that specializes in health or medicine. even when it comes to normal people, meaning not mentally ill and transgendered. When you go to your doctor, don't be afraid to ask questions of what the results could be to your body in terms of side effects from a prescribed drug. Make your doctor explain it to you. Understand what they're prescribing for you and what the results could be and what the side effects could be. And if that drug's got enough history and testing, hey, what are the long-term effects of this? You know, on a personal note, I do ask my doctor, and he's a great guy. He explains it to me in depth, and he dulls it down to English, so I can understand it. He doesn't have to just run on with the Latin terms and the medical terms. He tells me exactly why he's prescribing what he's prescribing, what it will do, any possible side effects that I might have to worry about, and what the results would be if I take the drug on time the way he prescribed it. I encourage every one of you to do that, because you know what? All the doctors out there aren't that ethical, and they won't do that. And they're influenced by big pharma, and they'll do what they're told to do and marketing this stuff. So you want to ask questions. Now, I find it incredibly unfortunate that in this day and age, we can't even trust our medical doctors like we used to be able to. I remember when I was young, right? Just about everybody trusted doctors implicitly. Anything they said was a go. It was gospel. It was good information. It could be counted on. People relied upon. It was not affected by ideology to one or other, mode of thinking, at least not like today. Back then, doctors relied on science and scientific information resulting from tests and studies, double-blind and triple-blind. Yes, they took risks, and yes, many of them were still arrogant and had their little God complex, but that's not the point. The point is, by and large, the great majority of physicians in the past gave accurate medical information to the very best of their ability, using the foundation of science as their source, not the ideological position of appeasement. Question everything, my friends, and stay healthy, so you don't have to put up with any of this nonsense. And I don't trust anything coming out of the government agencies anymore, just none of it. All right, my friends and patriots, let's move on to our final subject of the day. This is one that I find very disturbing concerning the U.S. military and its dwindling numbers. Although I'm not a big fan of Fox News, as they've gone way too far to the left, I did find this article on their website, and it is worthy of discussion. So, on July 5th, the inept and incompetent Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin visited Fort Meade, Maryland, to give the oath of office to a batch of new recruits preparing to leave for boot camp. Secretary Austin did this to mark the 50th anniversary of an all-volunteer force, right, since the draft was dropped off from the Vietnam War. Or do I still need to call that a conflict? Anyway. If you sense a little sarcasm there, yeah, so be it. There's a little sarcasm there. I confess. Anyway, it turns out, right, back to the military, 80% of those volunteering today to serve, right, 80% of those volunteering for the military and for the rest, all our armed forces, come from families who had someone previously serve in the armed forces, right? So 80% of these recruits that we have today are at least at some level experiencing patriotism coming from their families and their family members who once served in the United States military or somewhere in that capacity. However, recruiting efforts are still largely unsuccessful, and the number of people entering the military is dwindling significantly, and that is not good news for America. Now, obviously, the liberal left, as well as the liberal Fox News, state a bunch of reasons for this, including that college has become a more popular option for high school graduates and the health crisis among people, with 77% of American youth not being eligible to serve, according to a Pentagon study. Now, that's right, folks. This is pretty damn scary. A 77% of our youth are unable to serve in the military because of a medical issue? Wow. We either have an incredible population of hypochondriac-like doctors who are simply diagnosing our youth with every conceivable disease thinkable and treating them for it, and of course, logging this into their permanent medical records, thereby disqualifying from the military. Or we have a bunch of internet and social media addicted youth who are completely inactive, overweight, sit in their living rooms and basements, playing video games all day, who at the ripe old age of 18 couldn't run around the block without being so winded that they'd heave and throw up on their own shoes. Though we can't discount the possibility that it's a combination of both hypochondriac physicians in league with Big Pharma and a bunch of lazy teens sitting around playing video games, posting on social media all day. Not only do I think both of those are actually playing a major role in our dwindling military, they are. So, we dug a little bit deeper into this, and we looked up the information that the Pentagon had. And what we found was an article on military.com that shared some of the statistics and the reasoning with us. I'm going to put that up behind us here. A few reasons for young Americans not being able to qualify for the military service is due to being overweight, using drugs, or having mental and physical health problems. I'm also going to put up here behind me, for those of you who are not watching on Rumble or YouTube, I'm going to read this one to you. Ready? Quote, when considering youth disqualified for one reason alone, the most prevalent disqualification rates are overweight, 11%, drug and alcohol abuse, 8%, and mental and physical health issues, 7%. The study, which examined Americans between the ages of 17 and 24, read. Close quote. So this study here, this was conducted by the Pentagon's Office of Personnel and Readiness. Friends, let's get back to that number. The ages in which they looked at were between the age of 17 and 24. 17 and 24. The prime of your life, where you've got the most energy. Testosterone is flowing like water through your body. You're as strong as you could be. You are ready to take on the world, grab the bull by the horns, wrestle any monster out of one of your favorite TV films. You are jacked between 17 and 24. But between being overweight, being addicted to dope, and diagnosis of mental and physical issues, 77% are unable to qualify for our military? This is a really big problem, folks. And according to the Fox News article, the U.S. Army missed its recruiting goals last year, which is 2022, by a whopping 25%. 25%? That is a tremendous amount of people who are no longer enlisting for the service in our armed forces. And interestingly, the article also talked about the fact that after 9/11, right, there was a huge increase in enlistment due to the wave of patriotism that swept our nation. Now, maybe it's just me, and maybe you agree, but I think this is a huge issue in the lack of people volunteering today. What I mean to say is that I attribute this to a lack of patriotism. So for those of you who were around in late 2001, we can remember, Congress all getting together on the steps in front of the Capitol and singing together in one voice. We remember the patriotism that came about as a result of being attacked on our own soil. Even an unlikable president like George W. Bush, right, who has since been castigated in every way possible. He went to grab ground zero, grabbed the bullhorn, started addressing the crowd, and tens of millions of Americans, just simply because of the patriotism, they loved it. And at that time, patriotism was, in our modern time, at an all-time high. Conversely, today, our children are subject to an education system that has bred teachers and professors to hate America and to despise its very existence. And just like the ridiculous transgender movement and that being shoved down the throats of our children, anti-patriotic propaganda is also being shoved down the throats of our children in public schools by school teachers, and of course in higher education by professors in both public and private universities. Social media is replete with examples of teachers completely unhinged, railing about how awful America is and how terrible we are as a nation. College professors requiring students to write papers denigrating America and highlighting all of its faults and all of its mistakes and absolutely denying the fact that America continues to improve. And we do continue to improve. And that's the truth of it, my friends. America has most certainly made mistakes. And I can guarantee that we're going to continue to make mistakes. But as a people, we learn. We do learn from those mistakes, and we continue to grow. We are unquestionably, as a nation, we're a work in progress. We're not a perfect work complete and at the very pinnacle of our existence. And we've never claimed to be that. Nonetheless, these so-called educators and professors brainwash our children into hating their country. And as a result, young Americans have no desire whatsoever to serve their nation in the very military forces that protect them. Now, also, I do think another thing that's playing a major role in this is the fact that the military has gone so woke. We know that wokeness is really a small group that's a really loud, squeaky wheel, just constantly making noise, nonstop noise. And we see through social media and on some of the TV channels our military and our Pentagon touting these LGBTQ members of the military and how they're basically trying to gay the military. I mean, that's what they're trying to do, gay the military. And the majority, by far the majority of Americans, and I would go so far to, as to guesstimate, right, that the majority of those Americans that completely disagree with that ideology are the same ones who would absolutely patriotically serve that country, but don't want to go there. They don't want to subject themselves to that kind of liberalism and indoctrination into LGBTQ. And they don't want it forced down their throats. They don't want to have to agree with it. And they don't want to be exposed to it. And if they're young adult males that plan on having a family and maybe getting married while in the military or accepting a commission and being a lifer and have wife and children, they don't want them exposed to it. And for those of you out there who still have children in school, I want to encourage you, continue to follow your child's education very closely. Monitor the curriculum and know what their teachers are using to instruct your children. My friends, it is very dangerous for us to have a dwindling number of people in our armed forces. Our adversaries know this. You know this. Those nations that hate us and would love to wipe us from the face of the earth. They know this. They're following it. And those dwindling numbers can only be interpreted by our adversaries as a weakened and frail America who cannot replace its volunteer military force. Now, my friends, I don't think this is going to be a lasting trend. One of the main reasons being that it's because regardless of what the Biden administration continues to do, we do still have a functioning and effective First Amendment, right? The liberal left lunacy has been exposed. And every day, more and more of it comes out. And equally as important, people sitting on the fence, such as independents, are taking notice. And thank God the majority of them are siding with the conservative Republican position that the left has just gone too far. And that right now, we're living in more of a United States of insanity than a United States of America. And as I've always said to you, I have hope, great hope for America. And I know that this too shall pass. But it doesn't mean that we can just back off or stop, become complacent, not even for a minute. We need to keep the pressure on. We need to keep pressing forward and holding our elected officials and the bureaucrats they appoint accountable for everything they do. And that goes back to what we open this podcast with. You cannot be afraid on social media. You cannot not post something that would challenge our government, that would ask a question because you're afraid of the result. We need to continue to do it. And we also need to make more of an example of the greatness of America. And all we do, the things we do, the posts that we put on social media, the things we say to one another. Friends, we can do a better job of advertising to one another and to the left and to the centrists that America's great. America's always been great. It's made mistakes. It's corrected them. It's the greatest nation on earth. That's what we need to focus on, friends. And it is a word of encouragement and a word of hope. All right, folks, that's our show for today. And I want to thank you for tuning in. We really appreciate you being here. And for you subscribers, thank you so much. You're so faithful and loyal. I love you to death, right? Also, as always, I'd like to remind you, please hit that subscribe button. It makes all the difference in the world to us moving up the charts and hoping to get others to watch us as well. We love America here at Cowboy Politics. We love our nation, we love our Constitution, and we love all the patriots out there willing to sacrifice and stand up for their country. So hit that subscribe button. Copy our links, post them on your social media site. Get others to follow us as well. Every little bit counts in getting the word out and getting people over to this conservative side. And remember, folks, say your prayers, love your family, and live a life of honor. We love you, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.